My name is Amanda, and I am 32 years old. When the bank called saying I owed over $500,000 for a house, I had never seen my entire world stopped. The woman on the phone insisted I had signed for a mortgage that would take 2 lifetimes to pay off. As the puzzle pieces came together, one horrifying truth emerged. My own sister Heather had stolen my identity. The person I had protected since childhood had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Before I share how this nightmare unfolded, let me know where you are watching from. Drop a like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted. Trust me, what happened next at that family dinner changed everything. Life before that fateful phone call was remarkably ordinary, but I had worked hard for that ordinary. At 32, I had finally established myself at Horizon Marketing in downtown Chicago. My position as a senior account manager was not glamorous, but it paid well enough for me to afford my cozy one-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park. The rent was steep at nearly $2,000 a month, but I loved the neighborhood and the independence it represented. Financial stability had been my obsession since graduating college with student loans that seemed insurmountable at the time. For years, I lived with roommates, packed lunches, and declined weekend trips to slowly build my savings account. By last year, I had managed to save nearly $40,000 toward a down payment on my own place. My credit score was 790-something I monitored religiously every month. This perfect credit score represented years of discipline and careful planning. My family situation was less idyllic than my financial one. My parents divorced when I was 12 and Heather was just 7. Dad moved to Arizona with his new girlfriend, barely 6 months after the separation, and his presence in our lives dwindled to occasional birthday calls and a check at Christmas. Mom was left to raise 2 daughters alone, working 2 jobs to keep us in our modest suburban home. Perhaps it was inevitable that Mom developed a special soft spot for Heather. My sister was the baby of the family, naturally charismatic with her big blue eyes and quick laugh. She struggled more visibly with Dad leaving, having temper tantrums and crying fits that demanded attention. I, on the other hand, became the responsible one, almost by default. While Mom worked late, I would cook dinner, help Heather with homework, and make sure the house was clean. This dynamic followed us into adulthood. When Heather dropped out of community college to pursue an acting career that never materialized, Mom defended her choice. When she moved back home at 25 after her third failed relationship, Mom welcomed her with open arms. Meanwhile, my academic achievements and career progress were acknowledged with quick congratulations before conversations inevitably turned to concerns about Heather. My relationship with my sister was complicated. As children, we had been close despite the 5-year age gap. I read her bedtime stories and braided her hair for school. I defended her against neighborhood bullies and taught her how to ride a bike. But as we grew older, the differences in our personalities became impossible to ignore. While I saved meticulously, Heather spent extravagantly. Her apartment was always filled with designer clothes, still-bearing tags, electronics she barely used, and furniture that cost more than my monthly salary. When I asked how she afforded such luxuries on her sporadic income from waitressing and retail jobs, she would vaguely mention side hustles or investment opportunities. The red flags were there, but I ignored them. 3 times in the past 5 years, Heather had called me in tears about overdrawn accounts or maxed out credit cards. Each time I transferred money to her with lectures about budgeting that she pretended to take to heart. The last time, just 14 months ago, I had given her $6,000 to avoid eviction after she fell 3 months behind on rent. She promised to pay me back with interest. I never saw a dollar of it. 2 months before the bank called, Heather invited me for coffee at an upscale cafe downtown. She looked different, more polished in designer clothes, with a new haircut that must have cost hundreds. She radiated excitement as she stirred her latte. "I finally did it, Mandy," she said, using my childhood nickname. "I bought a house." I nearly choked on my coffee. A house, how, where? "Lake Forest," she said casually, naming one of the wealthiest Chicago suburbs. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, with a yard big enough for a pool next summer. The math did not add up. Last I knew, Heather was working part-time at a boutique on Michigan Avenue. That is incredible, I said carefully. How did you manage the down payment? Those houses are easily over $500,000. Heather waved her hand dismissively. I have been saving. And James helped, of course. James was apparently her new boyfriend, though strangely, in the 6 months they had been dating, I had never met him. According to Heather, he was some kind of investment banker who traveled constantly. He sounds generous, I commented. We are in love, she replied, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. He wants to take care of me. When I asked for her new address to visit, Heather changed the subject abruptly, asking about my boring job and tiny apartment in a way that felt newly condescending. We parted with a promise to schedule a housewarming visit that never materialized. Something about the conversation left me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. My sister had always been dramatic and secretive, especially when things were going well for her. I assumed this was just more of the same. How wrong I was. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was preparing for a client presentation. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway, balancing my phone between my ear and shoulder as I sorted through presentation slides. Hello, am I speaking with Amanda Walsh? A professional female voice asked. Yes, this is she. This is Patricia Miller from Lakeside Financial. I am calling regarding your mortgage payment, which is now 60 days past due. I froze. I am sorry, there must be some mistake. I do not have a mortgage. There was a pause on the other end. Miss Walsh, according to our records, you took out a mortgage for $568,000 for a property at 720 Oak Ridge Drive in Lake Forest last November. The monthly payment is $3,412, and we have not received payment for January or February. My stomach dropped. That is impossible. I never purchased any property in Lake Forest. What followed was a 30-minute conversation that left me shaking. According to Patricia, I had not only signed mortgage documents for an expensive suburban home, but had made payments for the first 3 months before suddenly stopping. When I insisted there had been a mistake, she agreed to email me copies of the loan documents. 10 minutes later, I stared at my computer screen in horror. There it was, a complete mortgage application, with all my personal information, my social security number, employment history, bank account details, and a signature that looked remarkably like mine, but was not. The property address sounded vaguely familiar. I opened Google Maps and typed it in my hands, trembling. The street view showed a large, elegant 2-story home with a circular driveway and professional landscaping. Then it hit me with sickening clarity. This was the house Heather had been describing at our coffee meeting. I called in sick to work and spent the next several hours in a frantic investigation. I pulled my credit report, something I had not done in nearly 6 months. The mortgage was there, along with 3 new credit cards I had never applied for, all maxed out at their limits of $10,000, $15,000, and $20,000. My perfect credit score had plummeted to 520. Panic clawed at my throat as I called the credit card companies. Each told the same story. The cards had been opened in my name with my social security number, all with addresses in Lake Forest. The mailing address for statements had been changed online almost immediately after approval. I sat on my couch, surrounded by printouts and notes, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. My own sister had stolen my identity to purchase a house and open credit accounts. She had forged my signature and used my spotless credit history to finance a lifestyle she could not afford. The betrayal was so profound, so calculating, that I could barely breathe thinking about it. The next morning, I met with Diane Lopez, an attorney specializing in identity theft. Her office was small but neat, with credentials covering one wall and family photos on her desk. I brought all the documentation I had gathered, including the mortgage papers and credit reports. Diane reviewed everything carefully, her expression growing more serious with each page. This is one of the more extensive cases of identity theft I have seen, she said finally. And unfortunately, when the perpetrator is a family member, it complicates things significantly. What are my options? I asked, my voice hollow. Legally, you have 2 paths. You can file a police report for identity theft, which would likely lead to criminal charges against your sister. Or you can try to handle this privately, getting your sister to admit what she did and assume the debt legally. She explained that without a police report, getting the fraudulent accounts removed from my credit would be nearly impossible. The banks and credit card companies would have no obligation to consider the debt fraudulent. I would remain liable for over $600,000 of debt I did not create. Even with a police report, this will not resolve quickly, Diane warned. We are talking months, possibly over a year, to completely clear your credit. And if your sister actually contests the charges claiming you authorized her to use your information, it could become even more complicated. I left Diane's office with a decision to make that would change my family forever. Could I really file a police report against my own sister? The person I had helped raise, the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. But as I drove home, anger began to replace my shock. Heather had not made a one-time mistake or borrowed my credit card for an emergency. She had executed an elaborate scheme, systematically stealing my identity to finance a fantasy life while knowing it would eventually destroy my financial future. The premeditation was chilling. I tried calling Heather that evening. The call went straight to voicemail. I sent a text, "We need to talk about the house in Lake Forest. Call me immediately." Hours passed with no response. I called again the next morning. Nothing. By the third day of silence, my decision was made. I could not protect Heather from the consequences of her actions, not this time. With hands that would not stop shaking, I drove to the police station and filed a report for identity theft. After filing the police report, I decided I needed to confront Heather in person. Since my calls and texts continued to go unanswered, I had no choice but to drive to the address on the mortgage documents the house purchased with my stolen identity. The drive to Lake Forest took nearly an hour from my apartment. As I turned onto Oak Ridge Drive, the houses grew progressively larger and more impressive. When I pulled up to number 720, my breath caught in my throat. The house was even more imposing in person than it had appeared on Google Maps. A sprawling colonial-style home with perfect symmetry. It sat on at least an acre of professionally landscaped property. A luxury SUV I did not recognize was parked in the circular driveway. For several minutes, I sat in my car, gathering courage. This house, with its perfect exterior and manicured lawn, represented everything that had been stolen from me: my identity, my credit, my financial security, and most painfully, my trust in my sister. I finally approached the front door and rang the bell. Through decorative glass panels, I could see movement inside. The door swung open to reveal Heather dressed in yoga pants and an expensive-looking sweater, her expression changing from neutral to shock when she saw me. "Amanda, what are you doing here?" Her voice was high and brittle. "We need to talk," I said, stepping forward before she could close the door. "About this house and the mortgage in my name and the credit cards you opened fraudulently." Heather's face paled, but she quickly recovered. "I do not know what you are talking about. James bought this house." "Stop lying, Heather. I have seen the mortgage documents with my forged signature. The bank is calling me about missed payments." She glanced nervously over her shoulder before stepping onto the porch and pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "Look, it is not what you think. It was supposed to be temporary. James and I are getting married in June, and he is going to refinance everything in his name." "James," I repeated. "This mysterious boyfriend I have never met. Does he even exist, Heather?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "Of course he exists. He travels for work. He is in London right now." "Then call him. Right now. I want to speak to him." Heather fidgeted with her sweater. "He is in meetings. The time difference." "Let me inside," I demanded, my patience evaporating. After a moment of hesitation, she stepped aside. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, with soaring ceilings, hardwood floors, and furniture that looked straight out of a design magazine. But something felt off. There were no personal photographs, no evidence of a male occupant, and several rooms contained furniture that still had tags attached. "How could you do this?" I asked, turning to face her in the expansive kitchen with its marble countertops and high-end appliances. "You stole my identity. You committed fraud. Do you understand what you have done to my credit, to my financial future?" "You are being dramatic," Heather scoffed, though her eyes would not meet mine. "Your credit will recover. and it is not like you were using it for anything important. Not using it. I have been saving for years to buy my own place. A tiny condo somewhere, probably. Meanwhile, this house has already appreciated almost $100,000. She gestured around proudly. I made a smart investment. With my name and credit, without my knowledge or permission. Heather's expression hardened. You have always been so selfish, Amanda. You have a good job and savings. I had nothing. Was I supposed to wait tables forever while you hoarded your perfect credit score like some kind of trophy? I was speechless. In Heather's distorted reality, I was the villain for not willingly sacrificing my financial security for her benefit. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the harm she had caused, only entitlement and resentment. Over the next few days, I dug deeper into Heather's deception. A former colleague who worked in real estate helped me access property records, revealing that James had never been part of the mortgage application. The down payment, nearly $60,000, had come from an account in Heather's name. How she had accumulated that much money became clear when I discovered through social media connections that Heather had been borrowing money from various friends and acquaintances, promising returns from investment opportunities that never materialized. One particularly illuminating conversation was with Caitlin, a former roommate of Heather's, who contacted me after seeing my name in connection with the Lake Forest property. She told everyone she was engaged to an investment banker named James Caitlin, explained over coffee. She would show up with expensive gifts she claimed were from him, but I never saw them together. When I asked to meet him, there was always some excuse. Caitlin had loaned Heather $12,000 to invest in a startup James was advising. She never saw that money again, and when she pressed for repayment, Heather blocked her on all platforms. She was running a small-time Ponzi scheme, Caitlin concluded, taking money from new friends to pay back older ones, just enough to keep people from going to the police. But I guess she needed a bigger score. That bigger score had been my identity, my perfect credit history, that had allowed her to secure a mortgage and credit cards no bank would have approved with her own financial history. The final blow came when my mother called, her voice shaking with anger. "How could you go to the police about your sister?" she demanded without preamble. My stomach dropped. Mom, she stole my identity. She took out a mortgage and credit cards in my name without my knowledge. She made a mistake. She was desperate. That does not mean you turn family over to the police. A mistake, Mom. This was calculated identity theft to the tune of over $600,000. She said you knew about it, my mother insisted, that you agreed to help her get started and then changed your mind. The lie was so audacious it left me momentarily speechless. That is absolutely false. I had no idea until the bank called about missed payments. My mother's voice softened to the wheedling tone she had always used when asking me to accommodate Heather's needs above my own. Surely there is another way to resolve this. She is your sister. Family helps family. Where was this family loyalty when she was stealing my identity? I asked bitterly. Amanda Jean Walsh, my mother snapped, using my full name as she had when I was a child in trouble. You need to drop these charges and work this out privately. Think about what this will do to Heather's future if she has a criminal record. What about my future? With this debt and destroyed credit? You will manage. You always do. Heather is more vulnerable. The conversation ended with my mother's disappointment heavy in my ears. Once again, I was expected to sacrifice my well-being to protect Heather from consequences she fully deserved. For the first time in my life, I was prepared to refuse. After the confrontation with Heather and the distressing call from my mother, I knew I needed professional guidance beyond legal advice. I scheduled an appointment with Marcus Daniels, a financial advisor recommended by my attorney who specialized in identity theft recovery. His office was located in a downtown high-rise with a view of Lake Michigan that would normally have impressed me. That day, however, I barely noticed it clutching my folder of documents like a lifeline. The impact of this kind of identity theft is far-reaching, Marcus explained after reviewing my situation. Beyond the immediate debt, we are looking at 3 to 7 years of credit impacts. This will affect your ability to rent apartments, finance a car, obtain certain jobs, and definitely purchase your own home. He pulled up a projection on his computer screen, showing my financial trajectory with and without the fraudulent debt. The contrast was stark and devastating. Even if the creditors eventually remove these accounts from your record, which is not guaranteed, the damage to your credit score will linger. We will need to initiate disputes with all 3 credit bureaus, contact each creditor with copies of the police report, and prepare for a lengthy battle. When I asked about the timeline for resolution, his expression grew somber. In the best-case scenario, with your sister admitting to the fraud and cooperating fully, we might resolve the major issues within 6 to 8 months. More realistically, given what you have told me about her denial, we are looking at 12 to 18 months of active work to clear your name. The weight of that timeline, a year or more of my life dedicated to undoing the damage Heather had caused, settled heavily on my shoulders. I would need to put my own home buying plans on indefinite hold. The $40,000 I had saved for a down payment would likely be consumed by legal fees and temporary financial arrangements, while my credit was rebuilding. What about the mortgage specifically? I asked. The bank is threatening foreclosure proceedings. That is actually somewhat helpful for your case, Marcus noted. Foreclosure is a lengthy process, and it gives us documentation of the default. However, until we resolve this, you may face collection calls, potential lawsuits from creditors, and even tax implications if the debt is eventually written off. I left Marcus's office with a comprehensive action plan, but an even heavier heart. The road ahead would be difficult and long, with no guarantee of complete resolution. The unfairness of it all, having to fight to prove I was a victim rather than a participant in this fraud, fueled a growing anger that overshadowed my initial shock and hurt. The next day, I returned to the police station to provide additional documentation for their investigation. Detective Sarah Collins, a pragmatic woman in her 40s with short gray hair and direct eyes, had been assigned to my case. Family fraud cases are among the most complex we handle, she told me. The personal connections create layers of complications that straightforward identity theft does not have. My sister is denying everything I explained. She told our mother I had agreed to this arrangement and changed my mind. Detective Collins nodded. That is common. Perpetrators often rely on family loyalty to escape consequences. They assume the victim will eventually drop charges, rather than see a family member prosecuted. My mother is certainly expecting that I admitted. And what do you want? She asked, studying me carefully. The question stopped me short. What did I want? I had been operating on autopilot since discovering the fraud, reacting to each new development without a clear end goal beyond clearing my name. I want my financial identity restored, I said slowly. I want my sister to face consequences for what she did, and I want her to acknowledge the harm she caused me. Detective Collins nodded. Those are reasonable desires, but I should warn you, in these cases, full resolution in all 3 areas is rare. The system can help restore your financial standing eventually. Legal consequences can be pursued. But the personal acknowledgement you seek, the admission of wrongdoing and genuine remorse, that is beyond what the legal system can provide. Her honesty was both refreshing and daunting. I realized I had been harboring a fantasy that some authority figure, some system would not only undo the practical damage but also force Heather to truly understand and regret her actions. The reality was far more complicated. As the investigation proceeded, my mother's pressure intensified. She called daily, alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and thinly veiled threats about permanent estrangement if I continued persecuting Heather. Other family members began reaching out as well, their understanding of the situation clearly filtered through my mother's biased lens. Could you not have worked this out privately? My Aunt Susan asked during one particularly difficult call. Taking family matters to the police seems extreme. She stole over $600,000 of debt in my name, I repeated for what felt like the 100th time. That is not a family matter, it is a crime. Through it all, I maintained my resolve. I worked with Marcus to initiate credit disputes and sent certified letters to each creditor. I met regularly with Detective Collins to provide any requested information. I consulted with Diane about the potential for civil action to recover damages. I also began preparing for the upcoming monthly family dinner traditionally held at my mother's house on the last Sunday of each month. I had missed February's dinner, still reeling from the initial discovery. March's dinner was approaching, and despite my mother's cold treatment, she confirmed it was still happening and Heather would be attending. "It would be a good opportunity for you two to talk things through privately," she suggested, the implication clear that I should drop the legal proceedings and find a family solution. I had no intention of having a private conversation with Heather that she could later misrepresent. Instead, I made copies of the police report, the mortgage documents with the forged signature, and the credit card statements. I placed them in a folder that I kept with me at all times, a tangible reminder of why I could not back down, even as doubts and second thoughts plagued my sleepless nights. The day before the dinner, I met with both Marcus and Diane to finalize my approach. We agreed that while public confrontation was not ideal, the family dinner provided an opportunity to address the situation with witnesses present, preventing further misrepresentation of my position. "Remember, Diane advised your goal is not to humiliate Heather, but to establish the truth of what happened and make it clear that you intend to pursue all legal remedies to protect yourself." I nodded, though privately. I acknowledged that a small hurt part of me did want Heather to experience some fraction of the humiliation and distress she had caused me. That night alone in my apartment, I rehearsed what I would say and how I would respond to the inevitable defensive reactions. I prepared for tears, anger, and manipulation, all tactics Heather had employed throughout our lives when confronted with her actions. What I could not prepare for was the strange calm that settled over me as I made my final decision. After a lifetime of protecting my sister, of putting her needs before my own, I was choosing to protect myself instead. The guilt I had expected to feel was overshadowed by a growing sense of liberation. For once, I would not carry the burden of Heather's choices. She would. Sunday arrived with a sense of inevitability. I dressed carefully in a simple blue dress that projected confidence, applied minimal makeup, and styled my hair in a neat bun. The folder with the documents sat on my passenger seat during the 30-minute drive to my mother's suburban home, a physical manifestation of the boundary I was finally establishing. When I arrived, several cars were already parked in the driveway, including a rental car. I assumed belonged to Heather since her luxury SUV would have immediately raised questions about her financial situation. My mother's home was modest but well kept, the same house where Heather and I had grown up. Walking up the familiar path to the front door, I felt a surreal disconnect between the comfort this place had once represented and the confrontation that awaited inside. My mother answered the door with a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Amanda, I am glad you came." Her tone suggested the opposite. The living room was filled with familiar faces: my Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, my cousin Tyler and his wife Kayla, and my mother's longtime friend Gloria, who had been a fixture at family gatherings since my childhood. They greeted me with varying degrees of warmth, their expressions suggesting they were aware of some tension, but perhaps not the full details. Heather was the last to enter the room, emerging from the kitchen with a platter of appetizers, as if she were the hostess rather than a guest. She wore an expensive-looking dress I recognized from a high-end boutique, her hair and makeup flawless. When she saw me, she barely paused before placing the platter on the coffee table. "Amanda, you made it," she said lightly, as if we had not had a confrontation at her fraudulently obtained house just weeks earlier. "Mom was not sure you would come." "I would not miss it," I replied, maintaining eye contact until she looked away. Dinner was a masterclass in surface normalcy, covering churning undercurrents. My mother had prepared her standard Sunday feast: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, and her famous dinner rolls. The conversation flowed around safe topics, current events, Tyler and Kayla's plans for a kitchen renovation, Aunt Susan's recent vacation. Throughout the meal, I remained mostly silent, responding when directly addressed, but otherwise observing. Heather, by contrast, was uncharacteristically animated, dominating the conversation with stories about her work, her social life, and vague references to her boyfriend James, who was traveling for business again. "He is looking at investment properties in Boston," she explained to the table at large. We are thinking of buying a vacation condo there. I noted how my mother beamed at this declaration, proud of her younger daughter's apparent success. The irony was bitter, knowing that Heather's lifestyle was built on fraud and deception. As dinner progressed, Heather became increasingly bold, perhaps interpreting my silence as submission or defeat. "Amanda, you should let me introduce you to James's friend Michael," she said during a lull in conversation. "He works in finance too. You two would have so much in common, and he has a beautiful condo downtown." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable, positioning herself as the successful sister, magnanimously helping the struggling one. It was the final provocation I needed. I waited until dessert was served, my mother's apple pie with vanilla ice cream, a family tradition. As everyone took their first bites, I reached into my purse and withdrew the folder I had prepared. "Actually, Heather," I said, my voice cutting through the casual conversation, "before you start arranging my social life, there is something we need to discuss." The table fell silent. My mother's expression turned alarmed. "Amanda, this is not the time or place," she said quickly. "I think it is exactly the right time and place," I countered, opening the folder. "Since everyone here has likely heard one version of recent events, I think it is important they hear the complete truth." I removed the police report and placed it on the table, sliding it toward Heather, whose fork remained suspended halfway to her mouth. "This is a police report I filed 3 weeks ago for identity theft," I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. "Someone used my social security number and forged my signature to take out a mortgage for $568,000 and open multiple credit cards." Heather's fork dropped to her plate with a clatter. The sound seemed to echo in the stunned silence. That someone, I continued, looking directly at Heather, was my sister. "What is this nonsense?" Aunt Susan exclaimed, looking between us. I withdrew the mortgage documents next, placing them beside the police report. "These are the loan documents for a house in Lake Forest, purchased in my name without my knowledge or consent. The signature is forged. The house is where Heather is currently living." "There has been a misunderstanding," Heather finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Amanda agreed to help me with the financing temporarily. James is going to refinance everything once we are married." "That is a lie," I said flatly. "I never agreed to anything. I did not know about the mortgage or the credit cards until the bank called about missed payments. And I strongly suspect James does not exist, at least not as the wealthy financier you have described." My mother stood abruptly. "That is enough, Amanda. I will not have you attacking your sister this way." Attacking her mom, she committed fraud. She stole my identity. She has destroyed my credit and left me liable for over $600,000 of debt. Uncle Robert leaned forward, his expression grave. "Is this true, Heather? Did you use your sister's information without her permission?" Heather's eyes darted around the table, assessing her audience. Finding no automatic allies beyond my mother, her strategy shifted. "I was desperate," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "The housing market was moving so fast and I was going to lose my dream home. I planned to tell Amanda, but then everything happened so quickly." "You had months to tell me," I countered. "You made payments from your account for 3 months, then stopped. This was not a split-second decision, it was calculated fraud." "Where did you get the money for the down payment?" Tyler asked, his background in banking, making him perhaps the quickest to understand the full implications. Heather's tears disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. "That is none of your business." "Actually, it might be many people's business," I said. "I have spoken to several of Heather's friends who loaned her money for supposed investments that never materialized. It seems she has been running a small-scale Ponzi scheme for years." The table erupted in overlapping voices, questions, and exclamations, creating a cacophony of confusion and disbelief. My mother repeatedly tried to shut down the conversation, while Aunt Susan and Uncle Robert pressed for answers. Through it all, Heather's expressions cycled through panic, anger, and calculation. Finally, as the initial shock subsided, Heather adopted a new approach. "Fine," she said loudly, silencing the table. "Yes, I used Amanda's information for the mortgage, but only because she always had everything handed to her while I struggled." "Handed to me," I repeated incredulously. I worked 2 jobs through college. I lived with roommates for years to save money. I built my credit score through careful planning and sacrifice. You were always the perfect one, Heather spat. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect credit. Do you know what it is like living in that shadow? Mom made it clear you were the responsible one, the successful one. So, you decided to steal my identity because you were jealous? I asked, genuinely bewildered by her reasoning. I decided to take what I deserved. Why should you hoard a perfect credit score when I needed it more than you did? You were not even using it for anything important. The raw entitlement in her voice stunned the table into silence. Even my mother looked taken aback by the naked resentment in Heather's justification. Heather, Uncle Robert said slowly, "What you did is not just morally wrong, it is a serious crime. Identity theft involving this amount of money could mean jail time." "No one is going to jail," my mother interjected frantically. "This is a family matter that we will resolve privately." "It stopped being just a family matter when she committed fraud," I said firmly. "The investigation is already underway. The mortgage company and credit card companies are cooperating with the police." Heather's composure finally cracked completely. "You would really send your own sister to jail after everything I have done for you?" The absurdity of the question might have been laughable if it were not so infuriating. "What exactly have you done for me, Heather? Name one thing." She faltered, unable to produce a single example. In the weighted silence, the full extent of our unbalanced relationship became clear to everyone at the table. "I cannot believe you are doing this to me," Heather finally said, reverting to the victim role she had perfected since childhood. "Mom, are you going to let her destroy my life like this?" Before my mother could answer, I stood up. "I am not destroying your life, Heather. You did that yourself when you decided to commit identity theft. What happens next is the consequence of your choices, not mine." As I gathered my documents and prepared to leave, Heather made one final desperate attempt. "I will pay it all back, every cent. Just drop the police report. Please, Amanda." "With what money? The house is in foreclosure proceedings. The credit cards are maxed out. Your scheme of borrowing from one person to pay another has collapsed. There is no mysterious boyfriend about to rescue you." The truth spoken plainly in front of witnesses seemed to finally penetrate. Heather's shoulders slumped as the magnitude of her situation became undeniable. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice small for the first time. "I want you to admit to the police and the creditors exactly what you did. I want you to accept the legal consequences of your actions. And I want you to understand that you cannot manipulate or lie your way out of this situation." I looked around the table at the shocked faces of my family members, many of whom were seeing the dynamic between Heather and me clearly for the first time. "I am sorry it came to this," I told them, "but I will not be the victim of fraud and then be made to feel guilty for protecting myself." As I walked out the door, the weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks felt marginally lighter. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt certain I was on the right path. The weeks following the family dinner unfolded in a chaotic blur of legal proceedings, financial damage control, and emotional fallout. Detective Collins called 3 days after the confrontation to inform me that Heather had been arrested and charged with identity theft, forgery, and fraud. The amount involved elevated the charges to felony level with potential penalties including significant fines and prison time. "She is cooperating now," Detective Collins explained. "She has provided a full statement, admitting to using your information without permission and forging your signature on the documents." The news brought a complex mixture of relief and sadness. While Heather's confession would significantly streamline the process of clearing my name with creditors, the reality of my sister facing criminal charges was still difficult to process. "What happens next?" I asked. "She will be arraigned next week. Given that this is her first offense and she is cooperating, her attorney will likely negotiate a plea deal. She is currently out on bail." I later learned that my mother had mortgaged her own home to post Heather's $50,000 bail, a fact that was not surprising but still painful. Once again, my mother had committed her resources to rescuing Heather without hesitation. The legal consequences were just the beginning. As Marcus had predicted, resolving the financial aspects of Heather's fraud proved to be a long and arduous process. Even with the police report and Heather's confession, each creditor had its own procedures for fraud claims, requiring multiple submissions of documentation, notarized statements, and endless phone calls. The mortgage company was particularly challenging. While they acknowledged the fraud, the foreclosure process on the Lake Forest house continued, with my name still attached to the proceedings. Marcus explained that until the title could be legally cleared, the foreclosure would show in public records associated with my name, further damaging my credit in the short term. "We need to be patient," he reminded me during one particularly frustrating meeting. "The system is not designed for speed or simplicity, but we are making progress." Small victories came incrementally. One credit card company removed the fraudulent account from my record after 8 weeks of persistent effort. Another agreed to freeze the account while investigating, but would not commit to a timeline for resolution. The credit bureaus updated my files to include fraud alerts, providing some protection against future identity theft but doing little to repair the existing damage. Throughout this period, the family fracture deepened. My mother barely spoke to me, channeling all her energy into supporting Heather through the legal process. She hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and accompanied Heather to every court appearance, presenting a united front that pointedly excluded me. Other family members chose sides as well. Aunt Susan aligned with my mother, sending me a lengthy email about the importance of forgiveness and family unity that conspicuously avoided acknowledging the severity of Heather's actions. Uncle Robert and cousin Tyler, however, reached out with messages of support, recognizing the difficulty of my position and offering practical help where they could. "You did the right thing," Tyler told me over coffee one afternoon. "What Heather did was not a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was calculated and sustained deception." His validation was a rare bright spot in an otherwise isolating experience. Most of my social circle, while sympathetic, could not fully comprehend the complex tangle of legal, financial, and familial challenges I was navigating. I found myself withdrawing from social engagements, exhausted by the emotional labor of explaining my situation and fielding well-intentioned, but often unhelpful advice. The toll on my daily life was substantial. I took a leave of absence from work, when the constant phone calls from creditors and legal consultations made maintaining my regular schedule impossible. My carefully accumulated savings dwindled as I paid for legal representation, credit monitoring services, and basic living expenses during my unpaid leave. Sleep became elusive, with anxiety about my financial future keeping me awake late into the night. Even simple tasks like checking my mail became stress-inducing exercises, each envelope potentially containing new complications or demands related to Heather's fraud. 3 months after filing the police report, I realized I needed professional help to manage the emotional impact of the situation. I began seeing Dr. Eleanor Reed, a therapist specializing in family trauma and betrayal. "What you are experiencing is a form of grief," Dr. Reed explained during our second session. "You have lost trust in a primary relationship, lost financial security, and lost the family dynamic you were accustomed to, problematic as it may have been." She helped me recognize that my responsibility for Heather had been an unhealthy pattern established in childhood and reinforced by my mother's expectations. Learning to separate Heather's choices from my own sense of obligation became a central focus of our work together. "You did not cause this situation," Dr. Reed reminded me. "You cannot control how Heather or your mother respond to it. The only element you can control is your own response and the boundaries you establish moving forward." Those boundaries were tested 6 months into the legal proceedings when Heather's attorney negotiated a plea deal. In exchange for a guilty plea to reduce charges, she would receive 3 years of probation, mandatory financial counseling, 200 hours of community service, and an order to make full restitution for all fraudulent debts. The day after accepting the plea, Heather called me directly for the first time since the family dinner confrontation. "Amanda," she began, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "I know you probably do not want to talk to me, but please just listen." I remained silent, allowing her to continue. I am sorry, she said, the words sounding awkward and unfamiliar in her mouth. What I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it, and I kept doing it anyway. Why, I asked the question that had haunted me for months. Heather sighed heavily. Because it was easy. Because I convinced myself you would never know. Because I was jealous of how together your life seemed while mine was falling apart. None of these are good reasons, I know that now. Her apology seemed genuine, but experience had taught me to be cautious about Heather's apparent insights. Too often in the past, her moments of clarity had been performative, designed to elicit forgiveness without genuine change. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully. But I need more than words at this point. I know. My lawyer says the restitution will take years, but I am going to pay back everything. I am selling all the stuff I bought looking for a real job. And Mom's house, I asked, aware that our mother's decision to mortgage her home for Heather's bail had created yet another financial entanglement. Heather was quiet for a moment. I am trying to figure that out too. She should not lose her house because of me. The conversation ended without resolution or reconciliation, but it represented a small step toward acknowledgement of reality, a quality that had been notably absent in our interactions throughout adulthood. As the 1-year mark of the initial discovery approached, I had managed to clear about 60% of the fraudulent debt from my credit report. The foreclosure on the Lake Forest house had been completed with the legal documentation, properly noting the fraud. 2 of the 3 credit cards had been fully resolved, with the third still in dispute. My credit score had recovered partially, though it remained well below its previous level. The financial experts estimated another 6 to 12 months before my credit would be fully restored. The emotional restoration would take longer, with family relationships fundamentally altered by the experience. My mother and I maintained minimal contact, our conversations strained and superficial. She continued to support Heather, helping her find an apartment and a job after she was forced to leave the foreclosed house. While she no longer openly blamed me for Heather's legal troubles, her resentment remained palpable in every interaction. I had returned to work and was slowly rebuilding my savings, though my home buying plans remained on indefinite hold. The experience had changed my financial perspective, making me more cautious but also more determined to reclaim the security that had been stolen from me. Dr. Reed helped me recognize that while the practical consequences of Heather's actions would eventually resolve the breach of trust, was something I might never fully recover from. Learning to accept this permanent change to move forward without the expectation of complete restoration became the focus of my personal growth. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or pretending the harm never occurred, she explained. It means releasing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment while maintaining appropriate boundaries to prevent future harm. Finding that balance between self-protection and emotional freedom would be my challenge in the months and years ahead. The road to recovery, both financial and emotional, stretched before me long, but no longer insurmountable. 1 year and 3 months after that life-altering phone call from the bank, I stood in the small office of Marcus Daniels, my financial advisor, as he delivered news I had been waiting for. "Congratulations, Amanda," he said, sliding a document across his desk. "The last fraudulent account has been removed from your credit report. Your score is not quite back to where it was, but at 740 you are firmly back in the excellent range." I stared at the report, emotions welling up unexpectedly. The number represented more than just a credit score. It symbolized the reclamation of my identity and financial future after a long and painful struggle. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick, "for everything." Marcus smiled, understanding the weight of the moment. "You did the hard work. You persisted when many would have given up." Walking out of his office into the bright spring sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in months. The practical aspects of Heather's fraud had been resolved, though the emotional aftermath continued to shape my daily life in subtle and not so subtle ways. My relationship with my family had settled into a new normal, different from before but gradually finding stability. My mother and I spoke monthly, our conversations careful and limited to safe topics. The close relationship we had once shared seemed unlikely to fully return, but The raw anger had softened into a resigned acceptance on both sides. Aunt Susan had slowly come to recognize the validity of my position, especially after Heather admitted her actions in court. Uncle Robert and Tyler remained steadfast supporters, checking in regularly and including me in family events, even when my mother and Heather were present. As for Heather, our relationship had been fundamentally altered. The blind trust and automatic forgiveness I had extended throughout our lives had been replaced by cautious, limited interaction. She was 9 months into her probation, working at an entry-level position in retail and living in a modest apartment partially subsidized by our mother. True to her word, she had begun making small restitution payments, though at the current rate it would take decades to repay the full amount. The practical reality was that I would likely never recoup much of the financial loss, a fact I had come to accept. More significant than the money was Heather's gradual but noticeable change in behavior. The grandiose claims and constant manipulation had given way to a more subdued demeanor. Whether this represented genuine growth or simply the constraints of her legal situation remained uncertain, but it was a change nonetheless. My own life had undergone significant transformation as well. The experience had forced me to examine patterns and assumptions I had carried since childhood, particularly around family dynamics and my role as the responsible one. With Dr. Reed's guidance, I had begun establishing healthier boundaries, not just with my family, but in all relationships. Professionally, I had returned to work with renewed focus and eventually earned a promotion that helped stabilize my finances. My savings account was slowly growing again, though my approach to financial security had evolved. I now maintained multiple accounts at different institutions and invested in regular credit monitoring services, protective measures against future vulnerability. My plan to purchase my own home remained intact, though postponed and modified. The experience had taught me to value flexibility and emergency reserves above the status of homeownership priorities that shaped my revised financial planning. 6 weeks after receiving the cleared credit report, I encountered Heather unexpectedly at a local coffee shop. I had stopped in for a quick latte before work, and she was behind me in line. For a moment, we both froze, the familiar awkwardness of our new reality settling between us. "Amanda," she said finally. "Hi." Heather, I nodded, uncertain whether to continue the conversation or pay for my drink and leave. She solved the dilemma by asking, "Do you have a minute to talk?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. We sat at a small table by the window, the morning sunlight creating patterns on the worn wooden surface between us. "You look good," she said, and seemed to mean it. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. She wore simple jeans and a plain sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. "Thanks. How are you?" I asked the polite question, feeling strange given our history. "Managing," she replied with unexpected honesty. "The job is not exciting, but it is steady. My counselor is helping me understand my spending issues." She paused, then added, "I have not opened any new credit cards." The statement, delivered with a hint of pride, struck me as both sad and encouraging. The bar was low, but she was acknowledging it existed. "That is good," I said, unsure how to navigate this new territory. Heather looked down at her coffee, then met my eyes directly. "I have been thinking a lot about why I did what I did. Not just the identity theft, but all of it, the lying and manipulation. It was not just about money or things." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I was trying to be someone I am not. Creating this fantasy life where I was important and successful. Taking shortcuts instead of doing the work." She shook her head. "I watched you build your life step by step, and instead of doing the same, I resented you for it, and tried to take what you had created." The insight surprised me. It was more self-aware than anything I had heard from Heather before. "Mom always made excuses for me," she continued. "She never made me face consequences. I think she thought she was protecting me, but she was just teaching me I could get away with anything." And now, I asked quietly. "Now I am learning what it means to be accountable. It is not fun," she admitted with a small, rueful smile, "but it feels more real than anything in my life before." We talked for nearly an hour, the conversation more honest than any we had shared since childhood. There were no dramatic promises of changed behavior or tearful pleas for forgiveness, just a quiet acknowledgement of reality and tentative steps toward a new kind of relationship. As we prepared to leave, Heather asked, "Do you think we will ever be close again?" I considered the question carefully. I do not know. Trust once broken is difficult to rebuild, but I am open to seeing who you become now. It was the most honest answer I could give, neither closing the door completely nor offering false assurances. In the months that followed, I continued rebuilding my life with new wisdom. The experience had taught me painful but valuable lessons about family dynamics, financial security, and my own resilience. I had discovered strength I did not know I possessed and identified vulnerabilities I had previously ignored. Most importantly, I had learned that family love does not require blind acceptance of harmful behavior, that establishing boundaries is not selfishness but self-preservation, that sometimes the most caring action towards someone is allowing them to face the consequences of their choices. The road ahead would not be perfect or painless. Heather's restitution payments would likely remain inconsistent. Family gatherings would continue to carry an undercurrent of tension. The complete restoration of my financial position would take years rather than months. But I had emerged from the experience with a clearer understanding of myself and a stronger foundation for the future. The betrayal that had once seemed devastating had become unexpectedly an opportunity for growth and authenticity. As I look back on this journey, I wonder how many of you have experienced betrayal by someone you trusted and loved. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between family loyalty and self-protection? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more personal journeys of resilience and growth. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that establishing boundaries with family is not only okay but sometimes necessary for healing. Thank you for listening, and remember, protecting yourself is not selfish, it is essential.